Welcome back. I'm with Judge Dennis Davis. He's also professor of law at a few universities, talking to us about the situation regarding tax in South Africa now. Prof, the matter of money being taken out of the country by those implicated in state capture. Many South Africans wonder why that money is not being recovered and why those people are not being brought back to South Africa to face justice here. What's going on? What are our laws saying regarding the recovery of such monies?
Well, it's possible to recover money, Tim. Of course, it requires, I suppose, a significant capacitation within the National Prosecuting Authority and to some extent within revenue, going back to our earlier conversation. But you must remember that some people, for example, I think it's a notorious fact that the Guptas are in the Emirates, and I'm not sure that it's very easy to try to get them extradited back to South Africa or people like them. It's also probably true that much of that money has been laundered through a whole range of different offshore accounts, which makes it extremely tricky to trace. But it's not beyond the bounds of possibility, but it's going to require very skilled forensic auditors and experts to do that, which is why some of us believe that the National Prosecuting Authority should now be stretching its hand out and getting the assistance of the private sector. So, for example, some of these big accounting firms who themselves contributed to the problems that we're in should now be making available to our authorities a series of skilled and experienced forensic auditors to help in this regard. We need a sort of national plan on this because it won't be easy, partly because of where people have gone to, and partly because they've laundered money through a whole bunch of very complex structures, companies and trusts and so on and so forth. So it's going to require real skill to get anything back, frankly.
Well, I mean, there are many reports of some of the people that have been mentioned are still here in South Africa, right? And we've heard talk about lifestyle audits. Yeah, and also some, people lead opulent lifestyles, and people, ordinary folk, ask themselves, where do they get the money from? But those who are law-abiding get taxed more and more. The small, medium-sized businesses get taxed more and more. But they wonder why those who seem to be stealing or looting the state are not being chased, and that assets are not being recovered from them.
Precisely, and that's why you've got a declining tax morality, because you and I, who pay 100 cents in our tax liability, as it were, we look at this and we say, well, why are these people not paying? And people then start thinking, why should we pay? Now, there is absolutely no reason why, when we've been having all of these kind of inquiries and disclosures about money being distributed to left, right and centre, that in fact that proper lifestyle audits are not initiated by Sars. That comes back to the Nugent report and the capacitation of Sars. So I'm being enjoined by the Minister of Finance to look at the question of the tax gap, that is the amount of tax we should be getting, as opposed to the amount of tax we are getting. And I assure you, if I have my way, I would be ensuring that SARS actually does some very significant lifestyle audits of every single person who, in a sense, has been, as it were, fingered in these particular disclosures. Now, that's not to say that they may have been improperly and wrongly and unfairly fingered, but at the end of the day, then they should have nothing to worry about, because they'll be able to justify why they have income and expenditure the way they do. But I suspect we'll find a huge amount if we can do that. So that means that SARS has got to get out and do its job. And once it does its job and people then land up with huge tax bills, or even more than that, the possibility of going to prison for tax evasion, I assure you as well that tax morality will improve. It's the point I've made. And I think the public are absolutely entitled to expect that from their revenue service.
Now, you say that if SARS were doing that, then they would be able to recover a lot, which suggests that that is not being done at the moment. So within the current laws that we have in South Africa, they could do that? Or do we have to wait for new laws to be passed for them to do their job, to do exactly what you're talking about?
No, they are starting to do that, because the acting commissioner, Kingham, has begun to do precisely that. And, he is as it were, leading SARS in the right direction. And of course, a new commissioner will be appointed shortly, and I suspect new commissioner will continue to do that. It really is a question of having a look at what is your capacity in SARS, how much investigative knowledge and capacity do you have, where do you need to strengthen it, and then you don't have to change the laws. The laws are there. It's really a question of the political and ethical will of going in there and actually doing the lifestyle audits of people. And if you don't have a sufficient capacity to do so, ensuring that you do get it. And, you know, we can bring back many people who left revenue, who didn't want to leave revenue, the SARS, but did so because of the previous regime. And many of them are hugely skilled. We start doing that, we'll start seeing some results.
And of course, the other consequence of what we're discussing this morning is that even illegal industries have been established around these loopholes or lack of capacity on the part of SARS to tax them. We're talking about the tobacco industry, for instance, that there is now the illicit tobacco industry operating in South Africa precisely because people know that taxes are not being collected. What's your comment?
Well, that's exactly right. Now, if we go back to the discussion we had about the rogue unit, the whole idea, as I understand it, at the time of that unit, the investigative unit, was to deal with this particular problem. And so why are we getting so fussed about the idea of that it was a rogue unit when it wasn't a rogue unit, it was an intelligent capacity unit, and thanks to its being undermined, industries such as tobacco allegedly exploited the gaps and created havoc for us. It's exactly right. It's when you've got a properly capacitated intelligence unit that they can start tracing why it is that all this illegality is taking place, and you've got a parallel tobacco industry to take an example. And you're dead right. The laws are there. It's the question of the will and the people at the top of the SARS organization. And as I say, it's beginning under Mr. Kingan, who I think is doing a very good job, and it'll no doubt continue under a new commissioner. But that's what's so sad about this. We keep on talking about rogue units and forgetting, meanwhile, back at the ranch, billions were lost, billions which could have been used to uplift poor people.
Now, Prof, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about this, and I think a lot of people think about it too, that if the tax laws specifically were properly implemented and that SARS had the capacity that we've just discussed and were pursuing different cases where there is suspicion that people are spending more than what they earn, that they will be able to recover that money. And the impact of it would be to reduce levels of corruption in the country, isn't it?
Well, it would reduce levels of corruption. It would make us a system which would be far more constitutionally compliant. It would release all sorts of monies which we could use for a whole range of purposes. I mean, take the debate that we had about tertiary education. Well, we made a choice. Do we want free tertiary education for every child who deserves to be at university, or do we want to have more corruption? Well, we chose more corruption, so we couldn't afford to have the tertiary education we wanted. And you could replicate that right through all of the compelling arguments for social and educational and economic upliftment. And you're dead right. If we can eradicate corruption, of course, we should be growing far more, and I suspect we would. But even with the tepid growth rates that we've had, we would have had a lot more money to do the things that we should have done. And what's outrageous is that we've got millions of our fellow South Africans living in squalor and in hopelessness, where in fact we could have done so much more for them if we'd stopped this nonsense.
On reflection, and of course now and again you are asked to come up with proposals, ideas of how to improve our tax laws. Where do you think the loopholes need to be tightened, and where do you see the gap, you know, in broad sense? You still have got to apply your mind, I suppose, legally speaking, and look at the appropriate instruments that should be put in place. But where do you see the gap? What do you think is the immediate thing that can be done, the so-called low-hanging fruit that can be picked, that can be dealt with to solve the current situation?
I think at least two or three. I think we need to tighten the whole customs scenario, which I don't think is that difficult to do. I think it's already beginning to happen. and once you get the sort of unit in place, which they're starting to get in to deal with questions of customs, you will find that's pretty low-hanging fruit. Then if we can ensure that we've got a number of people dealing with high net worth individuals, I am absolutely sure we'll find a huge sums of money there which have been secreted away, or alternatively where tax is not disclosed. And then if we get a group of people in, and we used to have, who would call your base erosion and profit shifting unit. That would be a unit that would be looking at the kind of flows of money in and out of the country by corporates to see exactly how they're structuring their affairs. Again, if we did that, and those three things alone, I am absolutely sure that we would close the tax gap. And my guess is that if we... And then, fourthly, is to start actually attacking those people who are not paying their taxes over. There are a whole host of companies that are, and employers who are putting their finger up at Sars and not paying the PAYE over. Now, that's very low-hanging fruit, because those people have got to do it, and if they don't do it, they should go to jail.
Now, in terms of legal instruments that you think are there that can help reduce corruption, where do you think the state should be looking, or what is it that... I suppose some of it is in what you've just told me now. But, you know, with the widespread corruption, do we have the laws that we can use to stop this?
We have the laws. Whether we have the institutions is the problem. I think we now realize just what we lost when the scorpions were replaced by the hawks. I think we now know what we lost when we've had the NPA degraded as an institution over the last decade. It's obviously of huge frustration to members of the public, and frankly it is huge frustration to anyone who cares about constitutional democracy in South Africa, that people open up their newspapers day in and day out, read about all this corruption, read about stuff which comes out of the Zondo Commission, and we have not had one prosecution yet of any meaningful kind. And we know that when, for example, the hawks have gone to Parliament, etc., it's been a very disappointing presentation which reflects rather poorly. So we need to ensure that our investigative and our prosecuting capacities are brought up to the standard that is required. One is hopeful that the new National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Batohi, will lead us in that direction. I accept she's only been there for a short while, but that's what's needed. We do not need new laws. We need investigative and prosecuting capacity which will actually do the job. And once it does the job and people know they can't get away with it, we will reduce corruption in South Africa. Of that I'm sure.
Very brief response from you, Prof, and of that you're sure, you're confident that things can happen, but are there cases that you think can be prosecuted immediately, or should we wait for elections and then deal with those issues post-elections?
I would prefer not to wait for the elections. I mean, you know, if you wait for elections and there's an indication that somewhere along the line the authorities are calculating what's the political price of this, frankly, they shouldn't be worrying about that. We've had enough of that. One would hope that by now, given all of the information in the public domain, there are slam dunk cases that should be brought before the courts ASAP. At least this, that people should be arrested and people should be charged and the investigation should be expedited, and that should be done now. The longer we wait, the less the confidence that the public have. If you want to look for a parallel of how it's to be done, look at the way Robert Mueller has been investigating what has been going on in Russia, in America, and the Russian link, and the way in which what he did was put pressure on sort of lower life characters in order to get more information to work his way up the tree. And that's exactly what we should be doing here. And when people do that, that's when people say, the public will say, aha, now we know you're taking corruption seriously.
Sure. Well, Judge Dennis Davis, pleasure talking to you, and thanks very much for sharing your insights with us. And that's all we had for you, and that was Professor Dennis Davis, who joined the Modise network. And be sure to tune in again next week. Thanks again from us. Enjoy the rest of your day.